Relay Station Corva-9 wasn't built for comfort. It was built for function. A gray utilitarian ring of metal and recycled atmosphere, it hung in the ink-black void like a forgotten washer in a cosmic laundry. Most beings passed through without a second glance, their minds already on their next destination. But for some, Corva-9 was the end of the line, the last stop before the big sleep. Bay 14 was a room of quiet endings. The air was thin here, a little colder than the rest of the station, with a faint chemical tang that never quite faded. A single bed dominated the space, its sheets a stark white against the dull gray walls. Monitors hummed softly, displaying readings that were less vital signs and more a gentle countdown. And in the bed lay Sol Devrena Ith, a Vothi elder, a being whose crystalline carapace had once shimmered with the deep, vibrant blues and purples of a twilight nebula. Now the light was dimming. The crystals were growing opaque, soft, like frosted glass. She was slowly, peacefully, becoming a statue of herself. It was a beautiful, terrifying process. And for her people, it was a private one. The Vothi custom was ancient. When the light began to fade, they were left alone. No doctors, no family, no friends. It was their final act of independence, a solitary journey into the great unknown. They believed that the soul needed silence to loosen its grip on the physical world, that the presence of others would create an anchor, a tether of love and grief that would bind the spirit to the dying husk, causing it unnecessary pain. To witness the final moments was a transgression, an act of profound disrespect. It was to intrude on the most private of moments. The rest of the station understood this. The Vothi were respected, their customs accepted without question. Everyone gave Bay 14 a wide berth. Everyone, that is, except Ren Okafor. Ren was an inventory worker. His world was a maze of cargo containers, shipping manifests, and the quiet hum of the station's automated sorting systems. He was a man who kept his head down, his hands busy, and his mouth shut. His uniform was perpetually wrinkled, his hair perpetually disheveled. He was unremarkable. A gray man in a gray station, until he walked into Bay 14. The first time it had been an accident. He was checking a shipment, took a wrong turn and found himself in a room he wasn't supposed to be in. He found a dying Vothi, terrified and alone, its alien mind screaming in a silent panic. Ren didn't know the customs. He didn't know the rules. He just saw a being in pain, and he stayed. He sat in the corner and just existed. He hummed a tuneless song his grandmother used to sing. He talked about the boring minutiae of his day, the weather on a planet he'd never visited, the weird taste of the nutrient paste in the canteen. He didn't touch, didn't intrude. He just was. And somehow the Vothi's terror subsided. The panic eased. The being found a sliver of peace, and it slipped away with a soft sigh that sounded almost like relief. After that, word got around. The Vothi were a private species, but they were also efficient. They realized that for some reason, this particular human had a profoundly calming effect on their dying. It wasn't empathy, not in the way they understood it. It was more like a quiet, solid presence, a rock in a storm, a fixed point in the chaos of their final moments. So they started requesting him. Not officially, of course. That would have been too direct, too honoring of a transgression. But the ship's doctor, a severe and perpetually frustrated Krogan named Kessenmath, would receive a discreet request, a suggestion, from the Vothi's kin, and he would have no choice but to pass it on. The door to Bay 14 hissed shut behind Ren, and the change was immediate. The sterile, humming atmosphere of the corridor was replaced by a profound, weighted silence. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic beep of the monitors. It was a sound that measured the decreasing gaps between a life and a legend. Sol Devrena Ith was fading fast. The crystals on her torso were milky white now, a stark contrast to the faint, dying embers of blue that still flickered in the center of her chest. Ren pulled up the standard-issue plastic chair, the one that always squeaked a little, and sat down. He didn't speak at first. He just sat. He let his presence settle into the room, a gentle counterpoint to the growing absence. "You know," he began, his voice a low rumble, "the cargo bay is a mess. Someone spilled a container of those luminescent gel pods. It's like a rave exploded in there. The cleanup drones are having a meltdown. A faint, almost imperceptible glow pulsed in the center of her chest. Was that a response, or just a reflex? Dr. Kessenmath is furious, of course. He's got a complex about the purity of the station's atmosphere. He says the gel pods are degrading the air quality. I think he just hates fun. Ren paused, looking at the ancient being. He could feel the weight of her presence, a vast and alien intelligence winding down. He'd done this a dozen times, maybe more. He'd become a specialist in silence and company. He knew all the whispers, the pointed glares from the medical staff. But he saw their faces, these dying creatures, and how they would shift from a state of tense resignation to a quiet acceptance. He gave them a hand to hold in the darkness, a familiar voice in the void. Suddenly the door hissed open with a sharp hiss, shattering the peace like a dropped glass. Dr. Kessenmath stood in the doorway, his scaly face a mask of barely contained fury. His yellow eyes narrowed to slits, and a low, guttural growl emanated from his throat. Okafor, out now. Ren didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this. She's resting, Doctor. The readings are stable. Your presence is the opposite of stable, Kessenmath snapped, taking a step into the room. You are interfering with the natural process. This is a violation of every medical and ethical code we have. You are not a doctor. You are not a priest. You are an inventory clerk. Ren turned his head, his gaze unwavering. I know what I am, Doctor. Then act like it, Kessenmath snarled, gesturing a taloned hand at the dying elder. Her vitals are erratic. Her cortical activity is spiking. You are not helping her. You are prolonging her agony. It doesn't look like agony, Ren said softly, his eyes still on the Vothi. It looks like she's looking for something, and she found it. Kessenmath let out a frustrated breath, a puff of hot, sulfurous air. This isn't a philosophical debate, Okafor. This is medicine, this is biology. The Vothi have evolved to die alone, it is their custom. You are a human. We are social animals. We die in a frenzy of activity and grief. You are projecting your own primitive emotional needs onto her. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Ren stood up slowly, the chair squeaking beneath him. You're right, he said. And for a moment, Kessenmath's expression flickered with confusion. It is a biological process, a chemical reaction. The body begins to shut down. The synapses stop firing. The heart slows. But you're wrong about one thing. He walked towards the doctor, his footsteps silent on the sterile floor. It's not a frenzy, it's not chaos, it's a journey. And it's terrifying. I've seen it. 100 times. 1,000. They all get to the edge and they're afraid. They cling to the threads of their life, fighting the inevitable all alone in the dark. And then, they see me. And something changes. They realize they don't have to be alone. It's not your job to hold their hand into the abyss, the doctor snarled. Maybe not, Ren conceded, shrugging his shoulders. But who else is going to do it? The doctor was silent. He had no answer. His logic was airtight, scientifically sound. He had centuries of medical and social data on his side. But the quiet, stubborn resolve in the human's eyes was a different kind of data. It was a variable he couldn't calculate. You're going to get yourself fired, Okafor, Kessenmath finally said, his voice losing its edge. It was a statement of fact, not a threat. Probably, Ren replied. He turned his back on the doctor. A deliberate, almost casual act of defiance. He walked back to the chair, the squeak of the plastic echoing in the silent room. He sat down, the chair groaning in protest under his weight. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes on the dimly glowing crystals in Sol Devrena Ith's chest. The doctor stood in the doorway for a long moment, a statue of conflicting emotions. Finally, with a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, the door hissed shut behind him. He was gone. Ren was alone with the elder. The silence settled back in, deeper than before. The monitors continued their rhythmic beeping. The air was cold. The last flicker of blue in the Vothi's carapace pulsed. A single, defiant beat. A question unspoken. "Doctor's got a point, you know," Ren murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a clerk. I don't have any answers. I can't stop the dark." The Vothi's form shifted slightly. A single, crystalline limb, delicate as glass, reaching across the white sheet. It trembled, hesitated, then gently rested on Ren's knee. The touch was cold like polished stone, but there was a desperate, pleading warmth to the gesture. Ren slowly, gently placed his own hand on top of the crystalline limb. It was a quiet contract, a promise made in the space between heartbeats. "But I can stay," he said. "I can sit right here. Until the very end." The light in the Vothi's chest pulsed again, stronger this time, a final desperate flare, a look of profound gratitude in those fading, ancient eyes. He was going to lose his job for this. He knew that. He'd pushed Kessenmath too far this time. This was Bay 14, the last room, and he was the only one in the whole station who could see why it mattered. The door to the corridor was a hair's breadth away, a quick escape route to his mundane life. Instead, he settled deeper into the creaking, unforgiving chair. He went back into Bay 14. The humming started low and uncertain, a thread of sound so thin it barely disturbed the silence. Ren's voice cracked on the second note, a rusty hinge in the quiet room. He didn't care. The melody was ancient, worn smooth by generations of use, passed down from his grandmother to his mother and then to him like a piece of family silver, nobody polished anymore. It was a lullaby, a silly thing about a small blue bird and a moon made of cheese. Utterly nonsensical. But it was the only song he knew by heart. The Vothi elder's breathing was changing, slower, shallower. The pauses between each breath stretched longer, like elastic pulled too thin. Ren had seen this pattern before. He knew what it meant. The body was beginning its final surrender, letting go of the mechanical processes that kept it tethered to this world. The crystals on her chest had gone almost entirely white now, with just a faint pinprick of indigo light at the very center, a stubborn ember refusing to die. He kept humming. The melody wobbled and wavered, a drunkard's walk across the musical scale, but it kept going. He thought about his grandmother, the way she used to hold him on her lap when he was small, her voice a warm blanket against the cold of the night. He thought about the way she smelled like lavender and old paper. He thought about the day she died, how he wasn't there, how he'd chosen work over a final goodbye, a decision that haunted him more than he ever admitted. He wasn't making that mistake again. Not with anyone. Not ever. The air in Bay 14 grew thick, charged with something invisible and immense. It was the weight of a life slipping away, the gravity of a soul preparing to detach from its earthly moorings. Ren felt it pressing against his skin, cold and insistent. He kept humming. His voice grew stronger, more confident, filling the small room with a warmth that seemed almost defiant in the face of the creeping cold. Then he heard it. A soft sound from behind him. The door had opened, but not with the angry hiss of Kessenmath's interruption. This was different. Gentle. Hesitant. Like someone testing the water with their toe before committing to the plunge. Ren didn't turn around, he didn't stop humming, he kept his eyes fixed on the dying elder, letting his voice carry the burden of the moment. Sol Devrena Ith's daughter stood in the doorway like a creature caught between two worlds. Her name was Riva, and she was beautiful in the way all Vothi were beautiful, her crystalline carapace a vibrant mosaic of deep blues and swirling purples. But there was a fracture in her light, a shadow behind her eyes. She was trembling, her delicate hands clasped together so tightly, her knuckles had gone white beneath the crystal. She was supposed to stay away. Her mother had made that clear. The Vothi custom was ironclad, a sacred tradition stretching back millennia. The dying faced their end alone, unencumbered by the emotional anchors of the living. Riva had respected that. She'd stayed in her quarters, staring at the walls, counting the minutes like prison sentences. But then she'd felt it. A pull, a whisper in her blood. Her mother was calling for her, not with words, but with something deeper, something primal. And now she was here, breaking every rule she'd ever been taught, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. Ren's humming continued, a steady anchor in the storm of Riva's emotions. She watched him, this strange human who had no business being in this room, this inventory clerk who sat with dying strangers as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. She didn't understand him. She didn't understand why her mother had asked for him specifically, why his presence brought her such peace. But she could feel it now, radiating from him like heat from a sun. He was a fixed point, a beacon in the darkness. She took a step forward, then another. Her legs felt like they were made of glass, each movement a potential shattering. The distance between her and the bed seemed infinite, a vast ocean of tradition and fear and love all tangled together. Ren finally turned his head. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected. Understanding. Acceptance. A gentle invitation that said, "This is your moment. Take it, or don't. I'm not here to tell you what to do." Riva's resolve, already brittle, finally shattered. She crossed the remaining distance in 3 quick strides, her composure crumbling like dried clay. She reached the edge of the bed and looked down at her mother, this once mighty elder who had taught her everything she knew, who had held her when she was small and afraid, who had guided her through the treacherous waters of Vothi society with unwavering love and patience. And now here she was, fading into white, becoming a memory before Riva was ready to let her go. Tradition screamed at her to leave. Every instinct bred into her bones, every lesson drilled into her from childhood, everything she knew about honor and respect and the sacred process of dying demanded she turn around and walk out that door. But then she looked at her mother's face, at the faint, dying pulse of indigo in her chest, and she heard the human humming that silly, beautiful, impossible song, and she realized something profound. Tradition wasn't going to hold her mother's hand. Tradition wasn't going to sing to her in her final moments. Tradition wasn't going to be here when the last light finally flickered out. But she could be. Riva sat down on the edge of the bed, her crystalline limbs creaking softly with the movement. She reached out with trembling hands, hesitating for just a moment, a final flicker of doubt. Then she took her mother's hand. The touch was electric. Sol Devrena Ith's eyes fluttered open, cloudy and distant, but there was recognition in them, a spark of awareness that hadn't been there before. Her fingers, cold and brittle, curled around her daughter's with surprising strength. The indigo light in her chest pulsed once, twice, a rhythm that matched the beat of Riva's frantic heart. Ren kept humming. The lullaby swelled and softened, weaving through the room like a living thing. He adjusted his voice to match the intimacy of the moment, letting the melody curl around mother and daughter like a protective embrace. He didn't look at them directly. He kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling, on the dull gray panels that had witnessed so many endings. He sang about the bluebird and the cheese moon, and he thought about his grandmother, and he let the tears fall down his cheeks in silence. Riva leaned closer to her mother, pressing her forehead against the cool crystalline surface of her carapace. She whispered words Ren couldn't hear, words that belonged only to them, a private language of love and farewell that transcended species and custom. Her mother responded with a soft vibration, a hum that resonated deep in her chest, harmonizing with Ren's lullaby in a way that was both haunting and beautiful, time-lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps it was the other way around. Ren's voice grew hoarse, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was his purpose now, his reason for being in this room, this tiny, insignificant act of humanity that meant more than all the cargo manifests and inventory logs in the galaxy. The indigo light in Sol Devrena Ith's chest dimmed further, flickered, held, dimmed again. Her breathing became so shallow it was almost imperceptible, just the faintest whisper of air moving through her ancient lungs. Riva tightened her grip on her mother's hand, her own breathing ragged and uneven, tears streaming down her crystalline cheeks like liquid starlight. Ren watched the monitors out of the corner of his eye. The lines were flattening, The peaks and valleys of a once vibrant life were becoming a gentle, almost peaceful plateau. He didn't look away. He kept humming, his voice cracking on the high notes, his throat raw and burning. Sol Devrena Ith, elder of the Vothi, beloved mother, fading light, opened her eyes one final time. She looked at her daughter, really looked, with all the love and wisdom accumulated over centuries of existence. She smiled. A small, fragile thing, barely visible but unmistakable. Then she looked at Ren, at this strange, stubborn human who had broken every rule to sit with her, who had sung to her when no one else would, who had given her the gift of not being alone. The indigo light pulsed one last time, brilliant and fierce, a supernova in miniature. Then it was gone. The monitors let out a long, steady tone, a sound of finality that echoed through the small room. Sol Devrena Ith's hand went slack in her daughter's grip. Her eyes stayed open, but they were empty now. Windows to a place that no longer existed. Riva let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. It was something in between, a raw, primal keening that ripped through the silence like a blade. She pulled her mother's hand to her chest, pressing it against the vibrant crystal of her own heart, desperate to share her warmth, her life, anything to bring back that precious indigo light. But it was no use. The light was gone. The last room had done its work. Ren stopped humming. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on both of them, demanding acknowledgement. He sat in his plastic chair, his voice gone, his throat raw, and he watched mother and daughter in their final embrace. He thought about saying something, some platitude about passing on or finding peace, but the words felt hollow, insufficient. So he just sat there, a silent witness to a moment that was none of his business, but somehow, impossibly, entirely his. Riva turned to look at him. Her eyes were swollen and red, her crystalline face streaked with the remnants of her tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just nodded. A small, broken gesture of gratitude. A simple acknowledgement that said, "I understand what you did here. I don't know why you did it. But I understand." Sol Devrena Ith died 40 minutes later, with her daughter's hand in hers and a human stranger singing badly remembered nonsense to the ceiling. The debriefing room was a small windowless box of gray metal and bad lighting. Ren sat in a chair that was too small for his frame, his back aching, his throat still raw from all that humming. He'd been here for 3 hours now, answering the same questions in slightly different ways, watching the station's administrators circle around him like sharks scenting blood. He'd told them everything. The honest, unvarnished truth. He'd walked into Bay 14, sat with the dying Vothi, and stayed until the very end. He'd sung a lullaby. He'd watched a daughter break tradition and hold her mother's hand. He'd done nothing wrong, and he'd done everything right, and he'd do it all again in a heartbeat. The administrators didn't seem to share his certainty. The formal complaints had been filed before he'd even left the room. Dr. Kessenmath had been thorough, documenting every violation, every breach of protocol, every transgression against medical ethics and Vothi custom. The Krogan doctor had done his duty with clinical precision, laying out a case that painted Ren as a reckless maverick, a dangerous variable in the station's carefully controlled ecosystem. The other complaints came from the Vothi delegation, their words wrapped in layers of diplomatic politeness that barely concealed their outrage. A human had intruded on their sacred ritual. A human had witnessed what no outsider should witness. A human had dared to offer comfort where comfort was expressly forbidden. Ren listened to it all with a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't his first time in a room like this. It probably wouldn't be his last. He'd spent his whole life being the odd one out, the square peg in the round hole, the human who couldn't quite fit into the neat categories the galaxy had prepared for him. The station was full of beings who understood their place in the universe. Ren had never been one of them. The door opened and Dr. Kessenmath walked in. The Krogan's scaly face was unreadable, his yellow eyes fixed on a data tablet clutched in his clawed hands. He didn't look at Ren. He barely seemed to notice the administrators. He just walked to the center of the room and stood there, a monument of conflicted professionalism. The head administrator, a flustered Zillion named Vex, cleared her throat. Dr. Kessenmath, we were just reviewing the incident report. Your testimony will be invaluable in determining appropriate disciplinary action. Kessenmath didn't respond. He was staring at the tablet, his brow furrowed, his expression shifting through a dozen emotions Ren couldn't quite decipher. The room fell silent, heavy with anticipation. Doctor? Vex prompted, her patience wearing thin. Is there something you'd like to add? Kessenmath looked up, and for the first time he met Ren's eyes. Something had changed in him. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered now with something else. Something that looked almost like uncertainty. I've been reviewing the medical recordings, he said, his voice low and rough. The monitors in Bay 14 capture everything: heart rate, respiratory function, neural activity, biochemical markers, everything. Vex leaned forward, her antennae twitching with interest. And? What did you find? Kessenmath took a long breath. I've been a physician for 73 standard years. I've treated thousands of patients from dozens of species. I've witnessed hundreds of deaths, more than I care to count. Terminal patients, every single one of them. They all follow a pattern, a predictable, measurable decline. He paused, turning the tablet over in his hands. The final hours are always marked by chaos. Adrenaline spikes, cortisol surges, erratic neural firing. The body fights the end, you see. It's a biological imperative. Even when the mind has accepted death, the body rebels. It's a violent, desperate scramble that often causes more pain than the disease that killed them. Ren felt his heart rate quicken. He knew where this was going. He'd been there. He'd seen the difference with his own eyes. But not this one, Kessenmath continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Sol Devrena Ith's vital signs were different. Her cortisol levels remained stable throughout her final hours. Her heart rate stayed consistent, low and steady. Her neural activity didn't spike. It declined slowly, peacefully, like a sunset rather than a crash. The administrators exchanged glances. Vex's antennae were rigid with confusion. What does that mean, Doctor? It means she didn't fight, Kessenmath said, his yellow eyes finding Ren again. She just let go, like she was falling asleep, like she was at peace. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications no one wanted to address. Ren kept his face neutral, his hands folded in his lap, but inside he felt something shift. A crack in the wall of bureaucratic indifference, a tiny opening that might just let the truth through. Kessenmath set the tablet down on the table, his claws clicking against the metal surface. I've reviewed the recordings 3 times now. I've run every test, every analysis, every diagnostic protocol in my arsenal, and I can't explain it. There's no medical reason for her vitals to have been that stable. No pharmaceutical intervention, no biological anomaly, no scientific explanation whatsoever. Vex's voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Are you suggesting the human's presence somehow affected her physiological state? Kessenmath was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow, reluctant gesture that seemed to cost him something. I don't know what else to suggest. The only variable was him. He sat with her for hours. He talked to her. He sang to her. And her body responded in a way I've never seen before. The room erupted into chaos. Administrators argued over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. This was impossible. This was unscientific. This was a direct challenge to everything they thought they knew about death, about tradition, about the fundamental nature of consciousness and its relationship to the body. A human inventory clerk had no business rewriting the rules of terminal care. But Kessenmath wasn't done. He raised a clawed hand, silencing the room with a gesture of immense authority. Centuries of Vothi tradition, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Centuries of dying alone, isolated from family, from comfort, from every humanoid instinct that drives us to seek connection in our final moments. We've accepted it as inviolable. We've never questioned it. We've never asked whether their way is the only way, or even the best way. He turned to face the administrators fully, his expression hard and unreadable. Sol Devrena Ith died more peacefully than any patient I've ever treated. Her daughter was there. A human stranger was there. And instead of panic, instead of pain, instead of the desperate biological scramble I've seen 1,000 times, she experienced something else. Something calm. Something gentle. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was almost tender. I've spent my entire career trying to make death less painful, less terrifying, less lonely. I've pumped my patients full of drugs, adjusted their environments, tried every intervention known to galactic medicine. And in 73 years, I've never achieved what this human achieved in a single night. Kessenmath looked directly at Ren, and for the first time there was no anger in his eyes. There was only a deep, profound curiosity. The kind of curiosity that drives scientists to challenge their most deeply held beliefs. The kind of curiosity that changes everything. Ren met his gaze without flinching. He didn't have answers. He didn't understand what he'd done any better than the Krogan doctor did. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd been present. Fully, completely, unshakably present. And that presence had made all the difference. The administrators were still arguing, their voices rising and falling like a storm surge. But Ren had stopped listening. He was thinking about Sol Devrena Ith, about the way her eyes had found his at the end, about the gratitude that had radiated from her ancient body like heat from a dying star. He was thinking about Riva, about the daughter who had broken tradition to hold her mother's hand. He was thinking about all the other dying beings on all the other stations and ships and planets throughout the galaxy, facing their final moments alone because custom demanded it, because no one had ever thought to question it. Kessenmath walked over to him, his footsteps heavy on the metal floor. He stopped a few feet away, his yellow eyes searching Ren's face for something, some sign of understanding or reassurance or whatever it was he was looking for. I would like to understand how they arrived at that, the Krogan said, his voice low and private, meant only for Ren's ears. And whether we have room to learn it. The station didn't change overnight. Change never works that way. It creeps in on quiet feet. A whisper at first, then a murmur, then a voice that can't be ignored. For weeks after the meeting, nothing happened. The administrators debated and deliberated and did what administrators always do, which was to talk in circles until they forgot what they were talking about in the first place. Ren went back to his inventory work, pushing crates and updating manifests, and he tried not to think about the empty room at the end of the corridor, but something was different. He felt it in the way other beings looked at him now, their eyes lingering a moment too long, their expressions shifting from indifference to something more complicated. Respect, maybe, or confusion, or that uncomfortable blend of both that humans call awe. He didn't like it. He'd never wanted to be noticed. He just wanted to do his job and go home and pretend the universe wasn't full of dying beings who needed someone to hold their hand. The request came through 3 weeks after Sol Devrena Ith's passing. A Voti family, distant relatives of the elder, reached out to the station administration with a question that made the bureaucrats squirm. Could the human come sit with their dying grandfather? Just for a few hours? They understood the customs. They knew they were asking for something unprecedented. But they'd heard stories, whispered from one family member to another, and they'd seen the peace in Riva's eyes when she spoke of her mother's final moments. They wanted that peace for their own. The administrators didn't know what to do. There was no protocol for this, no precedent, no form to fill out or box to check. They convened an emergency meeting, debated the ethical implications, and eventually reached a compromise that satisfied no one. They would allow it, but only this once. And only if Ren agreed to keep his mouth shut about the whole thing. Ren agreed. He walked into Bay 14 for the second time, and he saw something that made his chest tighten. A second chair. Small and simple, bolted to the floor beside the bed. It hadn't been there before. Someone had put it there deliberately, a quiet acknowledgement that the station's policy had shifted, that a door had cracked open that would never fully close again. He sat in his usual spot, the one that squeaked, and he looked at the empty chair beside him. It was waiting. Ready. A promise that this time the family wouldn't have to hesitate. The grandfather was a male named Thal, His crystalline carapace a soft mossy green that reminded Ren of forests he'd never seen. He was fading fast, his light flickering like a candle in a draught. Ren sat with him for hours, humming that same tuneless lullaby, his voice rough and unpolished but steady. And when the family finally came, trembling and uncertain, they found the second chair waiting for them. They filled it. They held his hand. They stayed until the very end. After that, the floodgates opened. Word spread through the Vothi community like fire through dry grass. There was a human on Relay Station Corva-9 who sat with the dying, a human who didn't care about customs or protocols or any of the rigid structures that governed Vothi society. A human who just showed up and stayed present and hummed nonsense to the ceiling until the light finally went out. It was absurd. It was unthinkable. It was exactly what they needed. The requests started coming in faster than Ren could handle. 1 a week, then 2, then 3. He worked his inventory shifts, pushing crates and scanning barcodes, and then he walked to Bay 14 and sat with strangers who were about to become memories. He never said no. He never asked for payment or recognition or any of the things that normal people demanded for their labor. He just showed up. Every single time, a plaque appeared on the wall outside Bay 14. No ceremony, no announcement. It was just there one morning, a small brass plate with words engraved in crisp, elegant script. Presence, if freely given, is not theft. Ren read it 3 times, his throat tight, his eyes burning. He didn't know who had put it there. The administrators denied any involvement. The Vothi delegation claimed ignorance. But it didn't matter. The words were true. They were the only truth that mattered. The months passed. The seasons of deep space, marked only by the station's artificial cycles, came and went. Ren kept working. He kept sitting. He kept humming that stupid, beautiful lullaby that he'd never quite managed to learn correctly. The melody shifted over time, evolving with each new encounter, picking up variations and flourishes that came from nowhere and went everywhere. It was a living thing now, a shared creation between him and the dying beings who heard it in their final moments. He never learned the real words. He'd tried once searching through the station's archives for the original version of his grandmother's song. But the records were incomplete, the lyrics fragmented, the tune lost to time. He gave up after a few hours. It didn't matter. The words he sang were good enough. They were his words, shaped by his voice, carried by his breath, offered freely to beings who needed nothing but the sound of another living thing sharing their space. The families kept coming. They filled the second chair day after day, night after night. They held hands and whispered secrets and cried tears that sparkled like diamonds on their crystalline cheeks. They broke tradition, every single one of them, and they discovered that the world didn't end. The universe didn't collapse. Their ancestors didn't rise from the grave to curse them. They just sat with their loved ones, and they held on, and they let go, and they were never quite the same after. Ren watched it all from his squeaky chair, his voice hoarse, his heart full, his eyes wet more often than not. He'd never expected to find purpose in a place like this. He'd never expected to matter. But here he was, an inventory clerk with a terrible singing voice and a stubborn refusal to let anyone die alone. And somehow that was enough. He thought about his grandmother sometimes, about the day he hadn't been there, about the guilt that had driven him into this strange calling. He didn't know if she would have understood. He didn't know if she would have approved. But he liked to think she would have smiled, liked to think she would have recognized the lullaby even through all the wrong notes and forgotten lyrics. The second chair stayed. The plaque stayed. The request kept coming, a quiet rhythm that became the heartbeat of Ren's existence. He never learned the real words to the lullaby. He stopped trying. The words he sang were real enough, real in the way that mattered, real in the space between one breath and the next, real in the presence of another being who needed to hear something, anything, that said you're not alone. She always did. She never learned the real words to the lullaby. It never once seemed to matter.